wind carried a ghostly chill across the Wyoming plains, whipping dust through the air as the sun dipped behind a line of rugged hills. On the edge of that vast frontier stood Silas Boone's ranch house, a towering structure of timber and stone, built not just with wealth, but with vengeance. Silas, a cattle baron in his prime, stood on the porch staring at the horizon, his wide-brimmed hat shadowing a face chiseled by grit and disappointment. 35, unwed, and wealthier than anyone within 100 miles, Silas had carved an empire from dust after the war, but he hadn't built it for family or legacy. Only despite the father who abandoned him and the woman who left when the bullets stopped flying. He lit a cigar and exhaled slowly as his foreman approached. "There's a letter for you, boss," the man said, holding out a pale envelope stamped with an unfamiliar wax seal. "Came all the way from Northbridge." Silas took it with a grunt. Letters never brought good news, just debts, lawsuits, or land squabbles. But this one was different. The script was delicate, feminine, precise. Inside was a note, penned by a lawyer on behalf of a client named Annabelle Sinclair. The offer was unusual, almost absurd. She proposed marriage, an arranged union, sight unseen. In return, she'd bring with her 300 acres of fertile land neighboring his own, land he'd tried and failed to purchase for years. It came with a single condition: she must remain veiled until the wedding was done. It wasn't a prank. Silas had the lawyer investigated, even sent a man to Northbridge. The land was real. The woman? Her history was a mystery wrapped in whispers, fire, illness, a vanished family. Rumors said she was disfigured beyond recognition. Others said she was cursed. Silas didn't believe in curses. He believed in cattle, land, and survival. By week's end, he rode into town and wired his reply. "I accept." The day of the wedding was colder than usual for late spring. Clouds loomed over the chapel, and not a single flower bloomed. The preacher cleared his throat as the townsfolk gathered in uncomfortable silence, unsure whether to be awed or appalled. Silas stood at the altar, unbothered by the murmurs behind him. He wasn't marrying for love or companionship. He had no need for either. This was a contract, like buying a prized bull or fencing new pasture. Then she arrived. Annabelle Sinclair moved with careful grace down the aisle, cloaked in ivory, her face hidden beneath layers of pale lace. Her veil fluttered faintly with every step. She was silent, composed, regal even, and unreadable. They said the vows, signed the documents. She never removed her veil. He never asked. When the preacher said, "You may kiss the bride," Silas simply nodded, and she bowed her head in acknowledgement. It was done. The guests left confused, gossip already spilling into the dirt roads like spilled milk. The marriage of Dust Valley's wealthiest man to a faceless stranger would feed the town's talk for months, if not years. They rode back to the Boone estate in silence. Silas glanced at her only once as the carriage rumbled across his land. "You nervous?" he asked, his tone more curious than kind. Annabelle turned toward him, her voice soft but unwavering. "Should I be?" He didn't answer. At the house, the staff greeted them with awkward bows and confused glances. Silas gestured toward the east wing. "You'll have that side to yourself," he said. "We won't pretend this is anything more than it is." She nodded once. "As you wish." As she climbed the stairs, her veil caught the light just enough for him to glimpse the outline of her lips, delicate, unmoving. Later that night, Silas stood in his study, glass of bourbon in hand, staring at a map of the now expanded Boone lands. The ink had barely dried on the marriage license, but already, the papers were drawing up new boundaries. His empire had grown, but his thoughts drifted, not to cattle or property, but to her. She hadn't spoken more than a few words, but there was something unnerving about her composure. Not submission, not fear. Something colder, like she was waiting. He poured another drink. The silence in the house was unsettling, as though it had inhaled and refused to exhale. At midnight, Silas passed her wing of the house. The door was closed, but faint candlelight flickered beneath it. A letter sat outside on the floor, folded neatly, with his name on it. He hesitated, then picked it up. "Mr. Boone, you are not obligated to pretend. I do not expect kindness, only fairness. What I've given you is mine to give. What I hide is mine to keep, until you earn the truth, if you ever wish to know it. Annabelle S. He read it twice. Then again. His hand tightened around the paper. Days passed. She moved through the mansion like a ghost, silent and distant. Yet the ranch began to change. Books were organized, ledgers balanced. A sick colt was nursed back to health by her gentle touch. The staff started to admire her, even like her. Silas observed from a distance. Every answer she gave was measured, every movement practiced, as though she were trained for a world that no longer existed. He began to wonder, who was she before the veil? One afternoon, he returned from a cattle auction to find her standing on the porch, veil fluttering in the breeze. She was staring out at the valley. He stopped beside her. You can't even see the land you saved behind that curtain. She turned her head slightly. Can you see anything clearly, Mr. Boone? Even without a veil? He said nothing. The wind whispered across the plains. That night, sleep eluded him. He lay awake wondering not about what he'd gained, but what she had lost, and why the mystery of her face felt more intimate than any secret he'd ever known. He was beginning to realize this wasn't a transaction. This was a story. The marriage took place under a thunder-smeared sky. No bells, no flowers, no crowd. Just the scent of rain on dry soil and the hush of something unspoken. The preacher looked uneasy, fumbling through his scripture as if questioning the ceremony's sanctity. Yet Barrett Shaw stood tall beside the veiled woman, his weathered face unreadable. His hand, however, trembled ever so slightly when he slipped the simple gold band onto her finger. Her name, she said, was Evelyn Rose, soft as morning dew, barely above a whisper. She never once lifted her veil. They signed the documents in silence. When the preacher finally declared them husband and wife, Evelyn offered no kiss, no smile, just a small nod and the barest hint of a curtsy. The townsfolk had plenty to say. She's hiding something hideous. Bet she's got a crooked mouth and one glass eye. Why would a man like Barrett marry a woman he's never seen? To that, Barrett had no answer, at least not one he dared speak aloud, because the truth was, he wasn't sure himself. At first, he'd agreed out of practicality. A letter from an Eastern matchmaker, claiming the woman had dowry, land, and no interest in love. Perfect. He didn't have the space in his heart to offer affection. Not since Clara. Not since the war. What he needed was structure. Help. A woman who would stay quiet, do her part, and not look too closely at the grief he wore like a second skin. But Evelyn was not what he expected. She moved like silk through the house, quiet, but never timid. Her footsteps were light, but purposeful. She unpacked without help, setting each item in its proper place with precision. He noticed her books first, worn covers in French, Latin, and German. Then came her herbs, lavender, rosemary, echinacea, neatly labeled and placed in glass jars in the pantry. She wasn't idle, nor was she meek. Yet she avoided him. Always. Barrett tried not to let it bother him. They'd struck a deal. She'd stay out of his way, and he'd offer her shelter, food, and his name. Still, something in him stirred every time he saw her shadow cross the hallway. Something he hadn't felt in years, curiosity. One night, a storm knocked out the ranch's lanterns. Barrett found her in the kitchen, lighting candles. The flickering light danced across her veil. "Don't you ever take it off?" he asked. Evelyn stiffened. "Only when I'm alone. You're my wife. I'm still a stranger." Barrett frowned, arms crossed. "You think I scare easy." She paused, her fingers brushing the hem of the veil. "It's not you I fear. It's what you'll see." And just like that, she turned and disappeared into the dark hallway. The next morning, Barrett found her tending to an injured colt in the stable. Her touch was gentle, her voice soothing, and the animal calmed under her care. It was the first time he saw her laugh. Softly, lightly, like it caught her off guard. "You know horses?" he asked, approaching with a bucket of oats. "I was raised on them," she replied. Before everything changed. He wanted to ask what that meant, but her posture stiffened again. That veil was more than fabric. It was a wall, and she knew how to build them well. Later that week, Barrett walked into the parlor to find her playing the piano. The melody was haunting, a slow waltz that sounded like it had traveled oceans and buried memories to reach their little ranch in Texas. "You play beautifully," he said. She stopped. "You shouldn't sneak up on people." "I wasn't sneaking." She stood abruptly, her hands trembling. "Please don't watch me." "Why?" he asked, stepping forward. "What happened to you?" She looked up, eyes wet behind the veil. "A fire. Years ago. Took my home, my face, and someone I loved." Barrett swallowed the lump in his throat. "I lost someone too." They stood in silence, grief stretching between them like a thread waiting to be tied or cut. That night, she left a cup of tea outside his door. No note, no explanation, but the gesture warmed more than his hands. As days turned to weeks, a quiet rhythm formed. They didn't speak much, but something unspoken hung in the air. He began to wait for the sound of her footsteps. She began to hum while she worked. Still the veil remained, until one afternoon, he returned from town early and heard voices in the barn. "He's not what I expected," Evelyn whispered. Barrett stopped. Someone else was there. "You've grown too close," the second voice said, feminine sharp. "That was not the arrangement." "He's kind, and he listens," Evelyn said. "More than any man I've known. You promised secrecy, and I've kept it, but I don't know how much longer I can keep hiding." Barrett stepped away, heart pounding. Who was she talking to? What arrangement? And what was she hiding? That night, she didn't come to supper, nor did she leave tea at his door. The parlor was silent, the piano untouched. The veil between them had grown thicker, and now, Barrett realized, it wasn't hiding a face. It was hiding a life. He stood by the fireplace, the crackle of wood unable to silence the echo of her words. "She's not what I expected." Neither was he. And now, he needed to know who he had really married. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving behind a hush that settled over Holleridge Ranch like a prayer unanswered. The field shimmered with dew, and the wind carried the smell of wet earth and something else, something heavier. Levi Colburn stood at the edge of the stables, nursing a tin of coffee gone cold, eyes fixed on the manor where his bride now lived. 3 days had passed since the wedding, and still, her veil remained. She wore it like armor, even at breakfast, even in the candlelight of the drawing room where they sat in silence, separated by polished oak and the weight of unspoken things. He hadn't touched her, had barely spoken, truth be told. But it wasn't revulsion that stopped him. It was fear, not of her, but of what this arrangement was awakening inside him. The woman moved with grace, spoke with quiet elegance, and held her spine, like a queen despite the whispers that had followed her from the train platform to the chapel. Levi had expected a transaction, a cold exchange of needs. What he hadn't expected was curiosity, or kindness, or the haunting tone in her voice when she asked, "What was your mother like?" No one had asked him that in 20 years. Inside the manor, the stranger he'd married sat at the piano, playing notes soft as rainfall. Her veil trailed down her back like woven smoke. He watched from the doorway, unseen for a moment, until she felt him and stopped. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said. "You live here now," she replied, not turning. "Intrusion isn't possible." He stepped inside. "I don't even know your name." "You never asked." He paused. "What is it?" She looked up. "Anora." He repeated it softly. "Anora." Something about the way it fit in his mouth made her smile beneath the gauze. "Why the veil, Anora?" Silence. "People said you were disfigured," Levi continued. "That's why your father arranged the marriage. But I've seen the way you walk, the way you work the garden when no one's watching. That's not the posture of shame. That's strength." Anora's fingers tensed on the piano keys. "And I don't care what you look like," he added. "I care that I'm living with a ghost." She turned to him slowly. Her voice was low, each word careful. "Do you promise?" He blinked. "Promise what?" "That you won't look at me with pity, or fear, or worse, regret. I don't make promises I can't keep." Her hands rose to her veil. He didn't stop her. With one slow motion, Anora lifted the fabric and let it fall. Levi felt his breath catch. There was no monstrous face, no twisted scars, No gaping wounds, but there were remnants of fire. The left side of her jaw bore a faded burn, the skin smooth and paler than the rest, stretching up to the temple, where her hair no longer grew. Her eye on that side, clouded, a ghost of sight, but her right side remained untouched. Whole, beautiful. She was neither disfigured nor ruined, only marked. And somehow, the contrast made her all the more striking. "This," she said, voice trembling for the first time, "is the truth." He stepped forward. "What happened?" "My father's barn," she whispered. "I was 12. There was a storm. Lightning struck, and I went in looking for the foals. I saved one." Her hand shook, but the fire caught me. Levi stared at her, not the scar, but the courage it took to reveal it. "They sent you away for this." She nodded. "In our town, beauty was currency. I'd been promised to the son of a banker. After the fire, they called it off. My father saw no use for a daughter he couldn't marry off. My mother begged him not to do it, but she died of pneumonia that winter. After that, I was just a cost. And now you're my wife." "Legally," she said, bitterness curling the edge of her voice. "But we both know what that really means." Levi shook his head. "No, we don't. Not yet." A flicker of surprise crossed her face. "You're the bravest person I've ever met," he said simply. "And not because of the fire, but because you dared to trust again." She looked away, suddenly overcome. He stepped closer, then reached out, not to touch her face, but her hand, gently, respectfully, as if she were made of something fragile and sacred. "I don't know what this marriage will become," he admitted, "but I'd like to find out, if you'll let me." Honora studied him, tears pooling silently in her good eye. "You're not like the others." "No," he replied. "I lost a brother in a flood. My father drank himself to death. I've seen the face of ruin, and it looks nothing like you." They stood in the quiet, two souls not yet in love, but no longer strangers. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds. Inside, for the first time, Honora let herself smile, truly smile. She picked up her veil from the floor and folded it neatly, setting it on the piano. Then, softly, she said, "I don't think I'll be needing this anymore." "Why?" "Redemption doesn't come wrapped in justice," he finally said. "It comes in doing the next right thing, even when no one's watching." She blinked, taken aback. "That's surprisingly wise." He smirked. "Don't get used to it." That night, sleep came easy, but dawn brought a letter, delivered by a rider from the east, covered in dust, sweat, and urgency. The seal was from Honora's father, a name that hadn't been spoken in the house since the wedding. She stood at the hearth, the parchment trembling in her hands. Levi sat nearby, watching her carefully. "What does it say?" "He's dying," she replied, voice tight. "Wants to see me. Says he's sorry." The fire crackled. "I should feel something," she whispered, "but I don't know if it's anger or grief, or just nothing." Levi leaned forward. "Then go find out." She shook her head. "He threw me away like I was spoiled grain. What could he possibly say now that would undo that?" "It's not for him," Levi said softly. "It's for you." The next morning, they rode together, 60 miles east, to a town called Wayland's Rest, where the past waited with bated breath. The house was smaller than Honora remembered. The porch sagged. The shutters hung crooked. But the man in the bed inside, he was just as sharp as her memory had drawn him, only thinner, paler, his eyes dimmed by time. "Honora," he rasped, reaching out with bony fingers. "You came." She didn't take his hand. "Not yet." "Why now?" she asked. He coughed. "Because I saw your name in the registry. Married a Colburn." He gave a pained chuckle. "Your mother would have liked that." Honora's heart thudded. "Don't talk about her." "I loved her," he said. "You sold her daughter." He winced. "I didn't know how to grieve. I buried her and every good part of me with her." Silence fell between them. Then, finally, Honora stepped forward. "I came to say this," she whispered. "I survived. You lost your daughter the day you turned your back. But I lived. I found my name again. And I don't need your forgiveness." His eyes welled with tears. but I need yours." She looked at him for a long time, and then, gently, she placed a folded handkerchief in his palm. "You have what little I can give." She left the room, without looking back. Outside, Levi waited by the fence. "Well," he asked. "I buried him," she said, "before he even died." They mounted up and rode back toward Holleridge. The prairie stretched before them, endless and golden, like a promise made by the earth itself. A week later, they stood at the property line, overlooking the fields they now owned together. "What do you want this place to become?" Anora asked, shading her eyes. Levi paused. "Home. Not just for us. For whoever's lost their way." She smiled. "A refuge. Redemption," he corrected. That night, they hosted the first of what would become many harvest suppers. Farmhands, widows, orphans, and outcasts filled the manor halls, music echoing off old walls, laughter ringing where silence once reigned. Anora danced barefoot on the porch, the moonlight catching her smile, her scars forgotten. Levi watched her from the threshold, his heart full in a way it had never been. He had married a stranger once. Now he loved a survivor. And Holleridge, it had once been land soaked in grief. Now it was a land of redemption.